You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 23, Who Saves the Saviors?
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log Prodigy, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm Charlene Schmidt.
And I'm Marina Kravchuk. Just like our flagship Mission Log podcast, each week here on Mission Log Prodigy, we discuss each and every episode of this animated series, discover what makes each of them special, and see if there are any morals, meanings, or messages that we have learned.
This week, we ask, who saves the saviors? Please remember that Mission Log Prodigy is an in-depth review podcast, so if you haven't seen the episode yet, you might want to put us on pause, go watch the episode, silly, and then come back to hear us talk all about it.
Mission Log Prodigy is produced for YouTube and as a regular podcast, so please be sure to engage the like and share buttons and subscribe to us here on Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel. Please make sure to listen on podcast.roddenberry.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or whatever you listen to Roddenberry podcast. You can also follow Mission Log Prodigy on Twitter at ML_Prodigy to keep up with all our latest news and updates.
And now, before we jump into the recap, let's remind everybody why our podcast is so unique, and that is because of our cadets, the younger Prodigy fans out there who share their thoughts on the show, and we are so grateful for those who answered our call for Into the Breach Parts 1 and 2. Hope you'll join us again this week and going forward. We love hearing your voices, especially those who were around for Season 1 and you're back. Oh, thank you. So good. This is where we put in the call for submissions for next week's episode, Temporal Mechanics 101. And if you need a refresher on how to do that, here's what you do. You send us a 1 to 2 minute voice message at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com and tell us the following. What is your first name and age? Did you like the episode? What was your favorite part? And what did you learn? And our deadline for Temporal Mechanics 101 messages is Saturday, July 20th. So please get those comments in before then so they can be featured at the end of our next show.
So for this show, let's kick off by answering the very questions you were asking our cadets. So Char, did you like the episode?
Absolutely, I did. Yeah, we are building some suspense, baby. Oh, the story threads are taking twists and turns already. This is such a fun ride.
Yeah,
what about you?
Fantastic. Oh, I loved it. And I suspect that it's going to be a resounding yes, a stock answer going forward for every episode. The game is certainly a footing. My goodness, there's so much stuff happening. The mission is happening, even though it seemed like, well, what are we going to do at the end of last episode? So now we're going to save Chakotay. Or are we?
Well, let's find out. Yeah. So what was your favorite part?
Well, the crew trying to work the problem, that whole thing where they're trying desperately and awkwardly, like not to spill the beans, not to screw up. And you're like, oh, Starfleet, what's that? It's just, and of course, Jenkum with his bird puns cracked me up. I mean, he certainly came up with a lot on the fly.
I want to hear the conversation in the writer's room where they were coming up with all of the bird puns, because they were having a good time with that.
What about you?
My favorite part, I think it had to have been Chakotay working with the kids to make their escape. And it's very clear to me that he sees a lot of potential in them, just as Janeway does. And I've definitely seen some parallels with him that we'll have to discuss later.
Yeah, that's true. So what did we learn?
Well, I think one of the most apparent things in this episode was a more common theme through all of Prodigy thus far, and that is, no matter what, keep going, keep thinking, you're going to find a way.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a very similar concept, like you have to stick together and not to give up. Because, I mean, we're certainly getting a lot of stuff thrown, our crew gets into a lot of tight spaces and places, but they're sticking together, and I mean, granted, right now we have just a portion of the crew, but they're still trying to work the problem together.
They are. Yeah, they're doing what they've always done, and this is one of their best strengths, is the fact that they have learned how to work together. It's really nice to see that. Well, thank you very much, Marina, for your answers to those questions. And now it's time for the episode recap for Prodigy episode 23, Who Saves the Saviors, written by Aaron McNamara and directed by Sung Shin. Here we go. Janeway watches helplessly as the Infinity goes through the wormhole. It's the only ship aboard with temporal shielding, so Voyager can't go after it. The Voyager crew needs options, but until they have some, they're at the mercy of whatever those aboard the Infinity do next. Speaking of the Infinity, she has crash-landed on Solum, 52 years in the future. Among the war-torn landscape is the Protostar, which means Chakotay hasn't launched the ship into the past yet. The countdown is still on, with 4 hours to go. Once that happens, Dal wants to rescue Chakotay. That's priority number 1. In the meantime, Starfleet protocol dictates that they lay low so no one in this time learns who they are and why they are there. But never mind that. They've already been spotted by the Vau N'Akat. Cut to Solum in our present day, where Asencia is reinforcing her argument to the elders that Gwyn has come to spread misinformation and lies, creating poisonous rhetoric among their people. She's interrupted by Iltheron as he approaches with a request that his voice be given to Gwyn, so she may request Valura. She asks the elders to hear her out. She may not have been born on Solum, but she chooses Solum as her home. She will challenge Asencia, and, if successful, will prove her origin as true Vau N'Akat. The elders must honor their past, and therefore grant the challenge. On future Solum, Dal, Zero, Jankum, and Majel have been taken prisoner, where, incidentally, Captain Chakotay and Adrik, the Protostar's first officer, are also being held. Chakotay approaches the group, asking where they came from. They try playing it cool at first, but Dal can't help but wonder if Chakotay still plans on making his escape, today? Planned? He's not subtle. If Chakotay and Adrik do an escape, they can't do it alone, not any longer. They'll have to take the kids with them. Chakotay formally introduces himself and Adrik and asks the kids if they can keep a secret. Just before their capture, Adrik hit a tricorder that has been sending a distress signal in hopes that it will reach Starfleet. Zero plays coy, pretending they don't know about Starfleet. But that, along with bird puns, doesn't work very well. It's time for a group meeting. The kids realize they may be in a causal time loop, meaning they were always meant to be here now to assist in the escape. Time to think fast and plan a jailbreak. On present-day Solum, Gwyn and Asencia face off in the Valura. They leave their heirlooms behind, and the arena descends downward, far out of reach of anyone else. On the way down, Gwyn realizes that this place is the source of Vau N'Akat heirlooms. Asencia wastes no time in summoning the copper-colored particles floating in the air into a weapon with her mind, and Gwyn follows suit, creating a shield and a weapon of her own. Combat begins. The fighting's intense. Both Gwyn and Asencia want a better future for Solum, but their methodologies couldn't be more different. Gwyn wants to prevent civil war altogether, but Asencia's focus is on making sure Solum wins against invading outsiders. Asencia sends several sharp weapons Gwyn's way, but Gwyn alters their trajectory with her mind, sending them into the wall behind her. They conveniently create rungs Gwyn climbs as she escapes the arena, realizing that combat with Asencia is futile. Back on future Solum, Jankum has a plan to disable the force field holding them all prisoner. Adrik doesn't like Jankum's percussive engineering technique on their hidden tricorder and also doesn't think Jankum's attempt will work, but Jankum politely disagrees. He hacks into his mechanical mitt, which was confiscated when he and the kids were taken prisoner, and uses the tricorder as a remote control to guide it to a panel on the guard's side. The mitt's movement gains the attention of a Vau N'Akat drone that goes on the attack, but it doesn't get far. Jankum's mitt lowers a section of the force field, enabling everyone's escape, and Jankum wastes no time dismantling the drone, while Majel gives a Vau N'Akat guard a good old Vulcan nerve pinch. It's time to fly the coop, which they do. Their old friend, the Protostar, is in sight, but several robotic Vau N'Akat guards stand in their way. Dal suggests that he and the kids distract them so Chakotay and Adrik can get to the Protostar. Chakotay notes that it's awfully generous of these ragtag renegades to put themselves on the line, and Dal says that perhaps at another time they could be friends. Majel nearly blows the kids' cover when Chakotay sees her with a tricorder the Vau N'Akat confiscated, but never mind that, it's time for Chakotay and Adrik to go. And in fact, it's time for everyone to go fast. Dal, Majel, Jankum, and Zero hitch a ride on Vau N'Akat speedsters, and after a few rounds of phaser fire, the unconventional but effective distraction works. The kids regroup at the Infinity and watch as Chakotay and an injured Adric make their escape, thanks to a disruptor that fends off the guards on their tail. Wait, is that supposed to be there? Where did that come from? And they board the Protostar. But they aren't supposed to be on the Protostar. This change could be catastrophic. And it's too late. The Protostar enters the wormhole, leaving Dal and crew wondering what they have done. No time to contemplate that right now, though. A beeping console on Infinity informs them of incredibly irregular tachyon particles and chronoton emissions, the likes of which Majel has never seen. It's confirmation that the timeline has been disrupted. Wherever the Protostar went, it was not to Tars Lamora as intended. This puts Gwyn at even greater risk. She's phasing in and out of existence, thwarting her escape out of the arena, but also inadvertently saving her life as she falls back to the ground and out of the way of Asencia's latest attack. An heirloom cradles her from a brutal fall. Asencia services, claiming victory, and the arena closes off any means of escape for Gwyn. The end, for now.
Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot.
And that was a very condensed recap. I tried to consolidate as many back and forth pieces as I possibly could, just because there's so many cuts between past and present on Solum.
Yeah. Well, let's see.
What were some observations you had?
Observations, yeah. Well, there's something that actually, going back to the previous episode when we get introduced to the elders, I found it very interesting that both of the elders are wearing these masks that are covering their eyes, and it's very reminiscent of the image of Justice blindfolded. I was thinking, like, is that meant to present that they're supposed to be wise, impartial, objective, or does this imply that they're also to a certain degree blind? They're not seeing where, what the situation that Asencia is leading them into. So that's an interesting thing. Just generally, like, if you notice, they have very interesting headwear. Like the guards have this triangular shape thing, which I'm very curious to know. Like, what is there? Is there a meaning behind it? We have some great world building for Vau N'Akat culture. With Prodigy being the entrance into the Star Trek fandom, we have the introduction to all the various races that were already established in other series. But meanwhile, we have Vau N'Akat, which are unique to Prodigy, that gets developed beautifully. So it's fascinating to see. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, piggybacking off of what you just said, Vau N'Akat culture is far from the stereotypical monocultures, the aliens of the week of previous Trek series. Mm-hmm. No, they put a lot of thought into how the Vau N'Akat look and things just in their on Solum, in their world. I love that, especially when the platform in the arena descends downward and you see the hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
Man, I could just stare at those for hours. Those are cool.
Yeah, I think it's very reminiscent of ancient Egypt to a degree, like the ancientness of the culture.
And it makes sense that the Vau N'Akat, they have a long and rich history, and everything is all about honoring their past and their legacy, essentially. They're very proud of themselves. So, it's just cool to see these little things showing up. I want to make a follow-up to a point you made last week, which is you asked about why couldn't Gwyn and Iltheron just show that they share the heirloom? And would that not be proof enough that Gwyn is Vau N'Akat? Apparently not. I mean, because they do that in this episode.
Yeah, I hope we actually get, I don't know, fingers crossed for, further developments. Maybe we'll know how this whole thing with heirlooms work in general, because it's such a fascinating concept, to have this thing that you operate with your mind.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it's discovered that there is a causal time loop, that's what we are, that the crew is meant to be there. It's such a beautiful solution, development, if you will. Also, we have Majel actually mentioned the other causal loops that are a big part of Star Trek, such as the Bell Rides and the events of the First Contact movie. So it's great. And speaking of Majel, I find that she's become a very nice part of this. She slotted in very nicely with our crew. She serves as a delightful conduit for like the exposition and explanation of concepts. So she's partly almost like taking on a part of Rock. Now that Rock is unfortunately separated from the rest of the crew.
Huh.
So it's great. And also now speaking of, we get the those folks who are only being introduced to Vulcans. Through her, we see how, granted, a young Vulcan behaves.
Yes, and a very disciplined one at that. I've got
Yes.
another parallel. I made a different parallel than you did, but definitely see Majel playing a role in the dynamic. And I've got some thoughts on the characters, so I'll save that for the discussion, though. I love how Majel wrapped a piece of fabric around her head to conceal her ears and eyebrows,
Spock.
just like Spock did in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, just so
That's
that they're
perfect.
not alarming any locals, trying to lay low. The whole thing of trying to just make sure people don't know who they are, where they're supposed to be, any of that.
Mhm.
That was great. And also, the play of this episode title is off of a TNG episode, Who Saves the Saviors? It reminds me of Who Watches the Watchers on Next
Yeah.
Generation.
Same
Love
thing.
it.
There are a lot of things that kind of like that. I mean, when Dal actually says, perhaps another time we could be friends. There, you have the Romulan in the Balance of Terror, in the Balance of Terror in the original series, saying, "In a different reality, I could have called your friend." It's
Same
so
thing.
interesting how it's like it's all kind of simmering there under the surface. Vulcan nerve pinch. Now, when she did it, I had some like. At some point, Chakotay should have been much more suspicious because things are just like, didn't she do a Vulcan pinch now? And then, of course, this whole thing with the tricorder and
Come on.
somehow he seems like almost I don't know, too trusting. Even though like he's in a horrible situation with his first officer. The going back to Majel, something that came up, something I've been very much enjoying over the past couple of weeks, is the commentary on Twitter that provided by the Aaron Waldke. It's like
Oh,
little
yeah.
clarifications and little details that pop up about various things, and it's very interesting. It's been he explained that Majel is actually a descendant of T'Pau from the
The
original
original
series.
series.
And
Yeah,
so
very cool little
it's
factoids like that coming out of really good questions people are asking on the
mhm.
platform. So, yeah, I agree.
It's
That's been one of
obvious
the
that
funnest
there's
things.
so much stuff behind the scenes that cannot be put in the episode. So, but it's wonderful that we kind of get this. And I almost hope that maybe they will go back to having a similar thing as was this first season had, which was the Instagram account that kept posting like logs
Oh,
from Janeway
yeah.
and other things, kind of like doing the same thing, introducing additional bits and pieces, which, it's probably not necessarily possible considering that we're now dealing with a lot more information. So here we are. And again, something that pops up that you immediately recognize the Tachyon particles and the chronoton emissions. Part and
Right.
parcel of time travel all throughout Star Trek. It's delightful. It feels, if you're already aware of what it is, it's like, well, of course, we're going to have spikes in these things because there's time
Right.
travel
That's how it
issues happening.
works, according to our understanding. Yeah, that's how you know this show was made by fans for fans. They
Mhm.
love the show just as much as we do, and they use their
They
encyclopedic
understand.
knowledge
Exactly.
collectively
They
and put all these little
understand.
things in for us, which it makes it so much fun to watch the episodes over and over and over because there's new things to grab onto every single time. I have a little note on the whole remote control thing where
Uh-huh.
Jankum's using the tricorder essentially as a remote to control his mitt. And I was just thinking, this is like a video game.
Mhm.
This is like a bunch of kids crowded around playing a video game, and you've got the friends surrounding the guy who's with the controller, and they're going, no, go left, go right, go away, jump, just like you would like if you're playing Mario Brothers or something. And I don't know, I just thought that was super charming. I loved it. It's kids being kids in a very
Basically.
stressful situation, and nevertheless, there is this little parallel here. Well, how about we move into discussion now? Because in the tradition of good old mission log, we dedicate a lot of time to discuss the finer points of each episode. So, how about we start with you, Marina? What were some things that you
Well,
really
its storylines continue to unfold. So we're dealing with these further threads, separated by time now. I find that this is fantastic serialization. Like, okay, we're only up to 3 episodes, but everything is proceeding, logically. It's not, sudden jumps. It's not so far we don't have any kind of standalone thing happening. So this season appears to be wonderfully serialized, and it's great to have the variety. All the different, as we know, different Star Trek series had different approaches to storytelling, successfully and unsuccessfully in whichever case we're talking about. But for the most part, once you pick a way to tell a story, you should stick with it, and it's done incredibly in this case. So we catch up with Gwyn. We finally meet Chakotay. What's more, it's delightful because it's somewhat reminiscent to the live action series where we would meet somebody from the so-called legacy characters, where it's the jump forward. Now we experience him, like decades, it's years after when we last saw them. So a really good job done already, even though we only see him for like half episode. The fact that like how Chakotay is that many years after Voyager came back. So there's a more to the development of the character. Like, he's a different man. He's no longer the angry warrior. So it's
no,
yeah,
he's a very different guy, and
he's a very different guy. Yeah.
It's really nice to see him that's not a sequence of flashbacks or recorded footage. Like, I feel like we're actually moving forward with his story now. And I can't help but see a lot of Janeway's influence in his command style. Do you see that too?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
He can't leave the kids behind. Like, you never leave behind a member of your crew. It's like one of her 3 rules. Keep your shirt tucked in, never leave behind a member of your crew, and go down with the ship. Well, he's doing quite a few of these things here. He's extraordinarily loyal to Starfleet, just like Janeway was. Like, he will do
which is
by any means necessary.
Curious development, if you think about it. See, it's like, I'm actually curious, like, what happened in the intervening years that got him to this point. It's like, because technically speaking, we don't know exactly what happened when Voyager landed. We know that, obviously Janeway is an admiral. We knew that for a while, and we know that Voyager is now the museum, a floating museum. But what happened? What did Chakotay do to get him to a point where he's now back to being the upstanding Starfleet officer on that level?
It's a good question, because for Prodigy viewers who did not necessarily watch Voyager, he was a member of a group called the Maquis. He was ex-Starfleet during the run of that show, and he did serve as Janeway's first officer, so something committed him back to Starfleet. And hardcore.
You could argue that his loyalty while in Delta Quadrant was, yes, to Starfleet Principal, of course, but also specifically to Janeway as the captain and the leader and his friend.
Like now that they're also back to the bigger Federation. So things must have gone, pretty well, I suppose, for him, because he's certainly, you look at him, he's like, yeah, that's a Starfleet captain.
Yeah, he's definitely become more Starfleet, for sure. He warms quickly to the kids, which is nice to see. He even asks if they can keep a secret, just as Janeway does in the episode before. I could not help but notice that.
Yeah.
And I also couldn't help but notice he would appreciate an unconventional but effective approach, like Dow's distraction, because he was a Maquis officer and didn't always do conventional things at
sometimes
first.
You have to punch through.
Exactly. We've got those unconventional Maquis tricks he pulled out in those very early days. So all of that, it just felt really good, actually, to see this character again, catching up with him finally, only to potentially lose him all over again.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh
boy. Well, going back to the kids, I wanted to bring up that this is something, again, very Star Trek like. They are students. So let's not call them kids, because they are basically teenagers, but they are students. They have enough know-how, knowledge, and training that it's great to see it reflected. The fact that, they realize, oh, it's a causal time loop. That's not exactly something you would do in the middle of, I don't know, a biology class in 8th grade or something, but they have enough knowledge to basically recognize, like, okay, that's the problem that we have to deal with. So it's that thing that Star Trek had from the get-go, where you have, competent characters reflected. Granted, in this case, they're still competent in training, I suppose. But still, you have the skill
Still.
that knowledge brings kind of shining through because yeah, they know what the issue is and they're trying to work the problem now. So it's very
Right?
track.
It's what they
I
do, and they're very
love,
smart. They are
yeah,
not a bunch of
you
flunkies,
know,
as Dale called
yeah,
themselves last week.
even though they had that kind of like gamey moment where Jenkin going left, going right. But isn't it great also to see Jenkin as the one to save the day because when we had
Yeah.
that wonderful episode in season 1 where Jenkin basically you see that he is the one who was doing impossible trying to save the sleeper ship that he was on
Oh,
and
yeah, his
being a
backstory.
brilliant engineer, Starfleet engineer basically, and then sacrificing himself for intents and purposes.
Yeah.
It's great to kind of go back to this, like, yeah, he's the guy who can fix the problem, whether percussive maintenance or not. So it's great to see that it's Jenkins that almost saves the day, I suppose.
I mean,
Um,
he plays a very big part. Jenkin Pog can fix it.
yeah.
And speaking of which, okay, what are your thoughts on Adric? Because I wanted to know more about this character before seeing this episode, and now I'm
Mhm.
thinking his negative energy was really off-putting to me. Just the way he treated Jankum, both when he's saying, "We've tried everything, we can't escape," and then
Mhm.
also when Jankum is working out his plan to escape, he's like, "This won't work," until it
Yeah.
does. Just Adric, have a little bit of
Yeah.
faith. Like I'm mentally just asking Chakotay, why did you pick this guy as your first officer? Because right now I
Do you
don't
know,
see it.
I think there is a slight parallel to Tysus in a way, because if you remember Tysus at first, when they're on board, they're like, okay, no civilians allowed on the bridge. The admiral is busy, like very dismissive until it's like, okay, things are happening. This, the crew is now part of the equation for the mission. So, and then, he becomes accepting of the fact that, okay, the kids are now involved in the mission, in
I
the
love that
classified mission.
parallel.
So it's okay. I wouldn't be surprised if a Drake, given a chance, perhaps would move in the same direction. Of course, we only see him very briefly, and then he gets injured and gets pulled into goodness knows what time with Chakotay. So here
It's
we are.
true. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you made that connection because I sure
Hmm.
didn't. That we've got that dynamic on Voyager A as well as here.
Hmm.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
Nicely
Generally
done.
speaking, it's great to see an unusual species, something that would be extremely difficult to do in live action. And,
Totally. And you
specifically,
can in animation.
yeah,
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 could you imagine the prosthetics for a live action
yeah.
bird character? Oof, that
I
would
mean,
get
it's of course doable. We have brilliant
sure.
folks, in Hollywood who can come up with all sorts of things. But
But
uh,
if you can just get an actor to voice the character
yeah,
and let animation take care of the rest, yeah, I totally see why they
yeah.
did that. Well, speaking of other parallels, I mentioned
So,
earlier Majel
mhm,
basically filling a role, and you mentioned Rock Talk. I thought of Gwyn
mhm,
because Majel really steps in as Dal's conscience in this episode, just as Gwen did a lot of times in season
yeah,
one, where he might want to be the captain, but she is there to make him take a step back and reason through all the options, all that is going on, not just what he sees right in front of him.
yeah.
And she displays really exceptional thoughtfulness of those types of things throughout the episode. And so maybe it's a little bit of a hybrid of like Gwen's wisdom, but
Yeah.
Rock's scientific knowledge and her know-how. Like she is studying up on Starfleet and she would know the regs. She would say the same thing if she were there.
As a matter of fact, it's probably a great thing that she's now part of the crew because she certainly adds in that logical what's the word? I suppose like the certain a structure to it because she is a Vulcan and she is coming already being I suppose several steps ahead of our crew, seeing how she's part of Nova Squadron, so she does have more Starfleet training. So it's an interesting dynamic. I'm curious to see how it will play out when everybody's back together as one big group, which I
Yeah.
presume will happen at some point.
So
So
question for you.
yeah.
Majel, have you warmed up to her as a character yet? Do you like her dynamic
Yes.
in the show?
Yes, because she reminds me a lot of Tlin. There's certain sarcasm, especially like what she exhibited in the first two episodes, certain slightly sarcastic attitude towards whatever's happening. So I think probably because of that, I kind of automatically I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a fun Vulcan, if there is such a thing. So yeah, I like her. I like her. I want to see what else, how it all develops.
I want to see where this character goes, but
Mm-hmm.
right now with this episode, I've not completely warmed up to her just yet, just because, well, Talyn, she is out of control for a Vulcan. That sarcasm is just dripping everywhere. Whereas with this character, I'm not quite seeing that with Majel. She is very uptight. She is very Vulcan. She is very disciplined, and she hasn't let loose
Yeah.
yet. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
kind
we
of a
have to
wait and see
remember
for
now
me.
that we know. Now that we know that she has quite, a legacy to live up to, with T'Pau as one of her, great grand, some mothers probably. So yeah, you can totally. So we'll see. Maybe she'll loosen up and go crazy. Here's a
You
concept.
never know. It can
Yeah.
happen all the time.
The another parallel, and just to kind of finish off on the observations, is the fact that we have pretty much similar situation happening at the end of this episode as we already had happened before, with Infinity dropping into a wormhole in untimely, manner. The crew is very similarly very gleeful, riding those speedsters around. It's like, look how distracting I'm being. They're so exciting that they're helping the escape. They putting, like the plan is working. We're gonna save Chakotay,
Yeah.
and so they're so just as excited as like, oh my goodness, we're part of the classified mission now, and
Yeah.
similar results eventually. Dal makes a seemingly minor mistake. He just drops a disruptor. So what? It fell there by the rocks, and catastrophic results. And now what? So here we
Right.
are.
Yeah. Yeah. That was it's even more chaotic. It's like taking
Mhm.
the Infinity falling into the wormhole last week and then knocking it up to an 11, as we say on the mission
Mhm.
log Discord,
Yeah.
where, okay, oh, now it's the Protostar going through the wormhole, but Chakotay and Adrika are on it, and that wasn't supposed to happen, and now what?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but I appreciate you pointing that out. That is more parallel storytelling. That's good
Mhm.
stuff. Yeah. Well, any other observations you want to put in, or
No,
shall we
I
wrap this
think
thing up?
that yeah, we should wrap it up because I think we covered most of like things that really stuck out. So where we
All
are,
right, sounds good.
final
All
thoughts.
right.
Here we are. What did we learn from this episode, and are there any final discussion points?
Well, I mean, we went through quite a bit in a short amount of time, just like these episodes do.
Mhm.
The episode really, this one kicks up suspense a lot. And the stakes are so high now. I mean, Gwyn's very existence is in danger, and we just caught up with Chakotay only to seemingly lose him
Yeah.
again. And I think the big lesson here is that messing with time is a very fickle beast. And like the butterfly effect, one little thing, that disruptor, it can completely reshape the future. And so we're leaving off this week with far more questions than answers. And so I'm looking forward to next week because, like Janeway, time travel gives me a headache.
I'm really glad that you bring up the butterfly effect because it's such a beautiful concept. For those who don't know what this is, look it up. I mean, it is very mathematical, but it does pop up more than once in pop culture, and most obviously in the Back to the Future, for example. But
Yes.
yeah, it's like dominoes. You accidentally knock one over, and the whole thing comes crashing.
Yeah.
The summary that I would kind of put to this episode, in addition to what you already said, is to very badly paraphrasing Captain Picard. You can try and do your best, and you can still mess up. I mean, they were going into this whole thing. It's like, okay, we crash landed 52 years into the future, and that's not what was supposed to happen. Let's fix this. And they still fail.
And they
So,
do their best.
and they do their best. Yeah. It's not like it's like, no, they went with it. I mean, they were ready to help every which way, especially considering that they realized that they were supposed to be there. So it's like, of course, like, we're going to do our best. And here we are.
Right. They were
Oh.
committed. They were
Mhm.
doing as much as they possibly could, right? But all it took was one little thing
Yeah.
to be out of place and
Yeah.
sets everything awry.
I mean, and so far, like seeing what we already mentioned in the beginning, don't give up because we know that they're gonna come up with something else in the next
Right.
episode.
That is
So,
correct. We are far from finished.
well, we are finished with the show. So thank you
Yes.
everyone for joining us here on Mission Log Prodigy. If you enjoyed our show, please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to our Mission Log Prodigy playlist on Roddenberry Entertainment YouTube channel, or find us on your podcast catcher of choice. Mission Log Prodigy is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment Production with technical direction by Earl Green. Our website and the opportunity to comment and connect with us is missionlogpodcast.com. And if you'd like to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Next week, we will take a look at Temporal Mechanics 101. So don't forget to watch that episode and send us your thoughts no later than Saturday, July 20th. You can do that at missionlog-prodigy@roddenberry.com. We can't wait to hear what you have to say about that. But right now, let's hear what you have to say about Who Saves the Saviors.
Receiving listener communications. Message playback begins.
What's your name and your age?
My name is Dietrich and my age is 6.
Did you like the episode?
Yes.
What was your favorite part?
Where Jacob was making all the jokes about the bird.
Yeah, that was pretty funny, wasn't it?
Yes.
We learned some things about how Tellarites talk, huh?
They say pretty inappropriate things.
That's funny, isn't it? Do you think it's hilarious?
Yeah.
What did you learn in this episode?
I learned that the timeline got changed.
So, is that a good thing that the timeline got changed?
Boo!
Boo! It's not good that the timeline got changed, so we have a problem that's been set up, huh?
And right now, in the episodes we're watching in Prodigy right now, they are
working on fixing it. They're working on fixing it, so we'll see what's going to happen the rest of the season, right?
Okay, what's your name and age?
My name is Rook and my age is 9.
All right, Rook, do you liked the episode?
Yes.
What was your favorite part of the episode?
My favorite part of the episode is when Gwyn and Asencia was fighting.
Oh, you like the fight? And what did you learn from the episode?
I learned from the episode that you should never travel back into the future. Go into the future or the past.
Right.
Because if you change any small thing, like kill a bug, it could change everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I fear for that when that day happens to you. All right, so thank you very much.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.